And there we go. I think I should have said that first. But so this series was kind of created to support the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, the mission to support the art curriculum on campus. And so we put together this series on Wednesday afternoons in October. And last week we talked a little bit about the history of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, and we had a panel with some award-winning printmakers who are students at UC Berkeley. Next week, we have an event called Lasting Impressions, an art historian's perspective on printmaking on printmaking and the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, and Professor Todd Olson from the History of Art Department, who checked out prints from the Graphic Arts Loan Collection as an undergraduate. We'll talk about prints, printmaking, and printmaking with UC Berkeley undergraduate, Albie Cartagines. And then our last event in October, we'll have an event called Impressive Art, an artist panel on printmaking. And artist and art practice faculty member Randy Hussong will talk with Susan Ballou, Emily Guy, and Robin Mikulski. And those are artists that we just purchased prints for in the last year, and they are been now added to the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. And so they'll be talking about printmaking and the prints that we recently purchased. And today's event is, again, how to make an impression, a tour of presses at two print studios in Berkeley. And the first part of this event will have Randy Hussong, who's an artist and faculty member in the art practice department who teaches printmaking at UC Berkeley. And he'll give us a tour of the printmaking studio on campus. And then the second part, we'll get a tour of Peter Koch's studio in Berkeley from Jennifer Osgood and Jonathan Durkin. And so with that, I want to again say thank you everybody for joining us, and hopefully you can join us for the other events in this series in October. And with that, Randy, I'll turn it over to you and take it away. Okay, there we go.
Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Randy Hussong. I'm on the faculty here at the Department of Art Practice, and I teach the printmaking classes. We are in one of two of our printmaking studios. We're located at 255 Kroeber Hall, currently called Kroeber. I believe the name change is in the works at the moment, but we share this building with anthropology, and we have a fabulous array of equipment in here. This building the construction was completed in 1959, and Professor Carl Kasten is the one who designed the layout of this room, and it has remained pretty much the same all these years. So we have reorganized some of the equipment in various areas, but it is predominantly stayed. He had a great design. Right here in front of me is the spectacular French-American press with the large wheel. It has a press bed size of 3 feet by 5 feet to accommodate large format metal plates for the intaglio process, as well as pieces of linoleum that size when we have to print a large format image. The other two presses we have here are Charles brand presses. This one is a 30-inch by 48-inch bed on this press, and the one in the center of the room is a 24 by 40-inch press bed. We use that one predominantly for the workhorse proofing of smaller plates, and we seem to have enough presses here to accommodate a class of intaglio. One of the other things to maintain the efficiency is to keep the workload and the work activity segregated. So these presses are situated with the inking slabs right adjacent to them. So this glass table is used for mixing of ink and rolling out inks, or inking up of a plate and wiping it on these towers. So there's an additional inking station right adjacent to the center press. And all the ink supplies, the variety of colors that we keep in stock, we have a lot of ink available for the students. We do predominantly black and white, but there are advanced color sections to each class. Part of the process of Intaglio is hard ground line etching. To do that, we need to apply a wax coating to the metal plates once they've been prepared. So that is done here on this hot plate. We set the temperature and a wax ground is rolled on evenly onto the plates under heat, and once it's removed, it'll cool in about 5 to 10 minutes. And at that point, the student can take the plate back over here to the work table where they can work on their design, render the images into the wax with the needles, and before taking it into the acid room to etch it, to secure the image into the plate. The students need a storage supply areas, so we have 2 sets of flat files in here, as well as larger drawers for the wooden sturdier ones for holding tools and the metal plates. The flat files are exclusively used for storing paper, drawings, some studies, and the finished prints throughout the semester. We buy our plates in bulk, large sizes. So for individual assignments, they need to be cut down to various sizes. It's quite convenient to have a plate shear right in the studio. So the larger plates are put in to the plate shear and they are chopped to size, and then they're ready to be filed, beveled, and polished before the hot ground goes onto the plate. So this is quite nice to have a plate shear in the studio. Don't have to go down into the sculpture yard and use an electric jigsaw or something to cut the plates, and it cuts a nice straight line. Carl Kasten was very smart about having a dedicated fume hood installed into the room. So he knew that the fume load would build up, and if everything was done without proper ventilation. So this fume hood is a constant draft, and the student puts on gloves and goggles to clean their plates. Since we use an oil-based ink process, they'll clean off the grounds after the etching process, as well as cleaning their plates after printing here in the fume hood with mineral spirits or denatured alcohol, and then the fumes are extracted from the room. Carl also knew that to have a dedicated aquatint box right in the studio would eliminate the coarse hand-dropped aquatints. We still do the hand-dropped aquatints, but we also provide the opportunity to use this aquatint box for distributing the powdered rosin onto the plate. So there's a fan in the bottom end of this, and it is open all the way to the top, and the rosin is distributed inside here. The fan, the doors are closed, the fan is turned on, and it lifts a cloud of rosin particles up in the air. You put your plate in on top of that grate, close the doors, and after a period of time, say 10 minutes, the plate is covered with an even distribution of rosin. Now, the rosin has to be fused with heat. About 250 degrees is what melts the rosin. and each rosin particle. So the second hot plate is located here in this area, right adjacent to the rosin box. We put the plates on this metal grate to elevate it so it's not in direct contact with the hot plate. Otherwise, I have found that the plates will warp if they're directly on that. So we bake the aquatint here. Once it's removed, it'll cool, and the purpose of the rosin is to create a ground to texture where we can control a variety of tonal gradations on the etching plate. We have a few examples here. They are demonstration prints. One is for relief, various textures that can be created. Another is for the etching process. It includes a variety of techniques that can be accomplished, as well as some of the assignments: dry point, aquatint, soft ground etching, hard ground etching, and various tonal gradations and their times in the acid, so a student can come and refer to these prints to make a selection on how dark or light they would like their aquatint to be etched. Once the plate is cut to size, it needs to be filed and beveled, the edges relieved, and then they need to be polished. So this is the polishing station for the students, and the various polishing agents are right here. Some gloves, steel wool, some various metal polishing products are located right here. And we also have a small collection of technical manuals, as well as artist books on print, lithography, relief, screen printing, and so forth. Once a print comes off of the press, since the sheet of paper was damp, it has to dry under pressure. Otherwise, it's going to buckle and warp. So here we've got some blotters, and each of the prints are sandwiched between various blotters, and then the weight of these plywood will allow the prints to dry completely flat. We have an area here for tearing down the paper prior to printing, so it's a clean station for printing, for tearing up your paper prior to soaking it, so for the print process, and another sink area here with some supplies for degreasing of the plates, and some various supplies, including sugar lift solutions and stop outs, and a variety of other materials. Carl also designed a dedicated acid room. So here, with fantastic ventilation, the acid baths are located in here, and the students are required to take a proper PPE before they go in there: goggles, acid-resistant apron, and gloves, so that their safety checkout is mandatory. Now this room, 255, is used, as I said, for relief and intaglio, but it is adjacent to room 265. So if we step over here, in this room, I teach both lithography and screen printing. One half of the room we've dedicated to screen printing, the other to lithography. Right here, you'll see some very large stones being stored underneath that table. One of those stones was used by William de Kooning in the early 60s to produce a very large, he produced two separate images on two different stones. And although the image is no longer on those stones, Those are the actual stones that William de Kooning used and George Miyazaki printed right here in these studios. So just like in the intaglio room, we have 3 dedicated presses for lithography. Lithography requires a different type of press. So it being a planiographic process, we teach the traditional method on a piece of limestone. We have a limestone here that has an image on it. After the image is rendered onto the stone, it is processed with a series of gum arabic and a few drops of nitric acid, in which case it then can be rolled up with ink and a piece of paper applied. And the pressure is different on a lithographic press, where the bed and the pressure bar comes down onto the, adjusted to the height of the stone. And that's once it traverses through the entire run of the stone, it transfers the ink via a scraper bar that transfers the ink to a piece of paper. So this studio is laid out in very much a similar way. We have a great collection of stones, and all the supplies for lithography are located conveniently adjacent to or alongside each press, so that all 3 presses can be operating at the same time, 3 different ink stations, and a nice supply of ink, rollers, and this press is a Griffin Press. It was built in Oakland. They no longer are making presses, but this Griffin Press we use for printing metal plates, large metal plates. And when I arrived in 1994, this room had only been used all those years for lithography. Professor George Miyazaki taught lithography for many, many years before he retired. But there's such a need and desire for screen printing. I brought the screen printing process into the department, and we will alternate lithography with screen printing because the work tables become filled with the lithographic stones for lithography, or they are the workstations for each of the artwork designs for screen printing. Along with the working up of the designs and drawings, that we have light tables for seeing the transparencies, building and assembling the various transparencies that are then used, exposed to the light sensitive emulsion on the screen before printing. So in order to apply the light sensitive emulsion, it's done so in this semi-darkened space, since it is a light sensitive product. And once the screens are scooped with the light sensitive emulsion, they're secured in this light tight cabinet so that they can cure while drying, which takes up to 6 hours. The students also, in these classes, need a place to store their supplies. So there's, again, a couple of sets of flat files for each student to store their completed prints or the film positives that they are working on to create their designs. The printing of the screen prints is done on these 3 various workstations. We have them separated in the classroom so that nobody's bumping into each other while printing. So there's one at that end, one here, and one here. As the prints are pulled, we need these various drying racks because these prints are not dried under pressure. They are printed with dry paper. So we have this drying rack conveniently located by these 2 stations, and another portable one on wheels that can wheel around to various areas of the room. So these print stations, as they're located for the screen printing, are convenient in that you have access to the drying racks, the washout sinks, the ink mixing section, and then the rack of storage for the various screens. We have a variety of sizes of squeegees as well as the inks. Our screen printing process is completely non-toxic, and we wash up everything in the sink. So we have a power washer to clean the screen, and this little shower area here for washing out the screen to control the splash that might occur from the washing. This lower sink is utilized when we're teaching lithography, and that is the graining sink that we use with a levigator to grain and levigate the stones. These rooms are quite generous. They are roughly 30 by 65 feet with at least an 18 to 20 foot ceiling. So it's a wonderful work environment with lots of light, floor to ceiling, windows that are facing the north. I think Carl Kasten, looking down on us, bless his soul, he'd be proud that his design and layout of these print studios has survived all this time. We haven't had to remodel. So I'd like to take you out into the hall and show you some of the examples of some student work that we display from time to time. Here are a few cabinets that display the various materials and products and a few proofs of in-progress prints. It might get some students that are headed down the hallway in various other classes interested in printmaking, and they might see these and decide to take a printmaking class. I try to keep a variety of prints up in these hallways that show the various print processes, some color, some black and white lithography, some black large etchings that use sugar lift and aqua tint, screen printing, multiple color, and the like. Well, I want to thank you for coming to the tour. I'm Randy Husald, and it's been my pleasure.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Randy. That was great. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Osgood, and she's going to give us a tour of the Peter Koch studio that's in Berkeley on 4th Street.
Hello. Welcome to what will be the Peter Koch tour. I seem to have lost my phone. Can our kind host allow my studio view to be studio? Thank you. Perfect. So first, I'm just going to introduce who Peter Koch is and why we are at his studio. Peter Rutledge Koch is recognized as one of the most accomplished printers and typographic designers of his generation. He began designing and printing books and ephemera in 1974. Beginning his career in Missoula, Montana, he started with one platen press, and we'll be taking a look at that in a minute. He's since settled in San Francisco and following the San Francisco literary tradition of fine press printing, has acquired an international reputation and several more presses. I believe at current count, we have 7 in here. Clients and collectors range from major international research libraries to bibliophilic organizations and private collectors and publishers. You can find several of his books in our own Bancroft Library. Between commissions, he designs, prints, and publishes limited editions of ancient Greek philosophers, the musings of maverick poets, and the images of world-renowned wood engravers and photographers. And you can get a sense of his work just by looking at the walls of his print studio. He's also one of the co-founders of the Codex Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving the art and craft of the handmade book. Every 2 years, the foundation holds an internationally renowned book fair in Richmond, California, bringing together dozens of artists from across the globe. So we'll start the tour at his oldest press and then be led through the rest of his studio by his studio manager of 15 years, Jonathan Gerken.
Okay, welcome to Peter's studio. I'm Jonathan, not Peter. Peter is out today, but we're give the tour around. This here is a Chandler and Price old style 8x12 flatten press. It's pretty typical for presses of its type. So to rewind a bit, all the printing we do here at the studio is letterpress printing. Which is a relief type of printing. If you can imagine like a rubber stamp, you have letters carved into the material, rubber or lead or wood, or depending on whatever you're printing from. And you apply a really thin layer of ink to the very topmost surface of your letters. And then you press that onto your piece of paper and then you get a print. You can do this with a potato or a rubber stamp or all manner of things. Lino cuts, or for all the typographic work we do, actual cast pieces of type. So this press here, we still use it on a fairly regular basis. It's a flattened press, so it has sort of 2 faces that open and close together. Oh, here we go. It's treadle operated, so I'm stomping away on the treadle to here to make it work, kind of like an old sewing machine. We would have ink up on the ink disc. The rubber rollers would get inked up, transfer it down onto the form with whatever type that you're printing from. And it goes smash-o in between and you get a print. And depending on how energetic you're feeling that day, you could print, maybe at least a few hundred an hour. Then you have to like balance on your other foot and you alternate so you don't get too tired. Back in the day when Chandler and Price was still in business, he sent them off a letter saying, can you tell me any of the history of this press? And it was made in the late 1800s and sent up to the Minnesota Type Foundry in St. Paul before it made its way eventually to Missoula, where Peter acquired it at the time. And then he since brought it to the Bay Area, and we've been using it ever since. It still prints beautifully. We'll print smaller things on it, like a business card, postcard, beer coaster, any of those sorts of things we might want to run. We use other presses for bigger, smaller, sort of depending on what we're running. We can head into the other room where more of the presses are. And this is the rest of the machine room where we have a variety of presses. Here we can see the grand tour. Well, here, we'll start what you're pointed at here. This is a Heidelberg Windmill. It's sort of new to us at the studio, but made in 1965 or so, plus or minus. They kept making them for a little bit after then. We've got a big guillotine paper cutter, which we use for trimming great piles of paper and for trimming the edges of books. On campus, there is likely one or a few in the bindery department if there still is one, at the library for trimming books after rebinding. Beyond that, here we have our Hacker test press, which was used for proofing photo engraving. So back in the day, if you wanted to spend lots of money on fancy printing, you would have full color printing. And so you have to print and proof all 4 plates for your cyan, magenta, yellow, and black that all build together for full color. And so they wouldn't actually be doing production on any of these hand cranked presses, but they would need to do proofing to make sure everything was looking correct in the way it ought to work. And then they would take those plates and send them over to large automated production presses. And so a lot of the sort of these proofing presses, now that they're sort of commercially obsolete, have been taken up for use by artists and studios, where they're just great for the sort of smaller production runs an artist might be working on in any sort of edition. The same goes for a Vandercook. They're kind of the most common proofing press for this sort of letterpress relief printing these days. If you've heard of any of this before, you may have heard of a Vandercook press before. We also make photopolymer plates in the studio here. You might need a bit of help getting the cart up on the rubber anti-fatigue mat. There we go.
Rocky road, kids, rocky road. There we go. Ah.
Okay. So if you want to print from relief, you'll need to manufacture some sort of plate. The obvious way to do this is just carve into the surface of a piece of wood or a piece of linoleum for that sort of carved printmaking. We also print from big pieces of wood type, and we've got a large collection of lead type cast at foundries for typographic work. But, you know, we live in the 21st century here, and we do a lot of design on computers. And so if you actually want to get your design out of InDesign, say, and make a plate and then slap it onto the press and print, you get a photo negative of it made, and you put that onto your photopolymer plate, expose it to ultraviolet light. The light polymerizes the plate material where all of your letters are, and all the remainder remains water soluble and pretty ecologically sound, so it all washes out with water. Historically, you would also do this with, say, a zinc plate or a copper plate. You have to use acid to etch that. We just do the photopolymer. You make the plate, and we'll show one of those later on, put it on the press and print. And so for a lot of sort of job printing, commercial printing, someone comes in and says, I need stationery made. We'll design it in the computer, send them a PDF to design work that way, make plates. But we'll also make plates for artwork, sort of depending on projects. This is the biggest, well, it's the biggest in sort of stature printing press we have. It is a Heidelberg Cylinder, which is about as modern as letterpress printing ever got. This press was made in about 1970. Sort of following this, offset lithography took over for commercial printing. Nowadays, offset is still widely available, as well as many varieties of digital printing. But from about 1450 to 1950, plus or minus, pretty much any book printing that was done was printed letterpress, and this is the sort of pinnacle of that technology. It is automated, and it will feed the paper, run it round. You can automatically adjust the amount of ink we have. It delivers it at the end. It'll print about 2,500 impressions per hour. And it's a marvel of mechanical engineering. The only electric part on it really is the motor driving all the works. Everything else is purely mechanical. And so you have to go through and oil and clean and adjust everything in the morning when you start up and you're printing it.
We actually have a short video clip to show you guys quickly of the cylinder running. It is a very loud press, so we didn't want to turn it on for this. Let me just bring that up super quick. That was the Heidelberg in action. We will now continue with the Rolly tour.
And the last press we have here is a Keats platen press. Again, sort of about as modern as this type of platen press ever got. This company is a Swiss company. We're actually still in business, still making presses, but for foil stamping. Like if you buy any sort of product packaging that has a sort of bright metallic shiny lettering or design on the cardboard or paper or whatever it is, that was done with foil stamping. And pretty much the only way to do that is you have to physically smash that, onto your piece of paper. And some of it is on big cylinder presses, some of it's on platen presses. But so they're still around, and we can, get parts from them if we need. Same with Heidelberg, they're still making modern offset presses as well. And so you can still, take care of these presses, even though any part you might buy has been sitting on a warehouse shelf for, 50 years. But this press prints beautifully. This used to be at the sort of research press that they had at Carnegie Mellon University before it was brought out to San Francisco by Jack Stoffaker, who was a Bay Area printer who had it for a number of years in his studio in North Beach before Peter acquired the press a few years ago. We've printed both sort of elaborate art book projects on this, both from type and plates and a variety of things. This press you have to feed by hand, so you would be standing here feeding paper in. I can fire up this press. So we've got the platens and the rollers, and they'll operate separately, which is sort of one of the nicer parts about this one. So you can see, you'd be grabbing paper, feeding it in, automatically lines up. And then we also want the rollers running. So they would go up and down, tapping. There we go. And our last press, which we actually have type, and we've got ink on the rollers, and we have all set up. The which?
You want to show your photopolymer plate?
Yeah, sure. So this is a photopolymer plate. And I don't know how much detail we can show here. Well, it's kind of a skull, and this is all tiny sort of typographic characters. And then we are printing. There we go. So something, apropos to Halloween and October here. And so on to Vandercook. Okay. So this is a Vandercook proofing press. If you have ever sent out papers for publication, you might receive back what are called galley proofs. And so nowadays, that's just a PDF, and you read through it and make sure there aren't any typos. Back in the day, it would be a proof printed from a press like this from a galley. A galley being there we go. This is a galley full of type. And so this is what they would put down on the press. This is some of the Parmenides from the Parmenides, the Greek philosopher book that Peter printed. This is some of the ancient Greek and the English translation. But in any case, you would get a proof off of this, also sort of a sample of what type looks like. There we go. But today, we have wood type set up on the press. So if you want any big type, you could conceivably cast that in metal, but that becomes bothersome for a number of technical reasons, and it's really heavy, and it gets kind of expensive. Can we tilt more and see everything? Does it show? Should I tilt more? Okay. And we can show some more wood type. We've got some out on the table. In any case, voila, there we go. And this is some of the Clarendon wood type that I want to say 20 pica tall. I think it, like at this size, you stop necessarily describing it in points just because it's so big. Yeah, wood type. So just letters carved from pieces of wood. This one still has a bit of ink carved on it. And this is one of some of the sort of circus typefaces. Same with, I mean, you can get pretty darn large. Any sort of big poster announcement things, sometimes those would be done lithographically. Sometimes they would have big relief printings, or depending on the technology and the era and the print shop that you were in. What else do we need on the tour? Or if we have any questions, we could answer questions.
I think if everyone's up for it, this would be an excellent time to start taking some questions. I guess if you have any questions, yeah, feel free to put them in the chat. We will be watching chat, and let us know what else we can possibly tell you.
Great, thanks so much, Jennifer, Jonathan. That was pretty awesome. And thanks, Randy, and for the tour you gave us of the printmaking studio on campus too. So yeah, we're here for another few minutes if anybody has any questions. So I have a question. So Jonathan, you were talking about that you were doing a print version of now I can't even say the name, the Greek philosopher Parmenides. Sorry.
Parmenides, you're getting there.
Do you guys have the fonts for like Greek and English there, or how do you print those?
Should we go to the Greek type cabinet?
Yeah, we can show off a bit of the type here. So the story, it might be a bit noisy with the boring card here. I'll go with that. So here we have the type collection, and we have a couple of different typefaces for Greek. There we go. Okay. Two of the typefaces that Peter has used for Greek books have been the Parmenides Greek and the Gil Sans Greek that he used to print an edition of Heraclitus. And so the Gil Sans was, as you might guess, carved by Heraclitus. And I think this you can still get from Type Foundries. So here we go. If you know your Greek, and if you know your California typecase, that's where all the letters are in all the little boxes, and it's all just sort of one letter at a time, setting your type. Yeah. The story of the other typeface is that for the sort of early Greek philosophers, so that's where Parmenides is, Peter wanted a typeface that looked more like the lettering that you would see carved in stone at that time. And so there didn't exist a typeface for that. And so he worked with a type founder and type designer, Dan Carr, who did the design for the Parmenides Greek for it to be cast in lead, which is, I could spend like an hour describing this as a sort of typographic design project. There's a wonderful book on this describing the whole thing called, oh, what was it? Not the Elements of Typography, the Parmenides book. I don't know. It's in the catalog, sort of adjacent to the Koch Parmenides book. But in any case, that is this one here. And let me find actually a sample of the Parmenides Greek.
The studio is also formerly a live workspace. This is the live part of the live workspace.
Well, it's mostly the library. So this is a sample of the Parmenides Greek. There we go. That we printed up. And so you can see this sort of the type design for this is a little bit different from the sort of, you know, more flowing script-like, or the very sort of thin, you know, Gil Sans Greek. And here quoting our sort of resident Greek scholar, Richard Siebert, who is also a fellow printer here in Berkeley. The sort of rough translation of this Greek is, education's virtue is evident in its absence. Any other questions or?
How many languages do you guys have in like type for?
How many languages do you have in lead type? Just the two?
We just have, basically everything is English. Peter has a smattering of Greek, a smattering of like a couple of drawers of sort of dingbats, the sort of odd symbol characters that you might need for setting anything. And a lot of the type that Peter has presently, used to have more of a sort of deaccession, is more sort of older, more sort of ornamental typefaces. We do have like one sampling of a Chinese typecase, because historically San Francisco was the sort of center of printing on a lot of the West Coast, because this is where the railroad sort of ended, and this is where a lot of sort of heavy industry brought up. And all of this printing equipment has always been that sort of heavy equipment. But because San Francisco also had a sizable enough Chinese population, there was Chinese typecasting and Chinese print shops. And those typecases are sort of a whole lot bigger, just because you have way more characters you have to deal with. But that we just have like a typecase of, and it's just kind of neat and seeing it. We've never actually done any printing from that. So it's mostly been the Greek for Peter.
Good, thanks so much for answering those questions. I just think it's so awesome that I mean, all those different types, I think, are just great.
Are there
In their own sense.
are there new fonts being made?
So there, you can get new type made from foundries from existing designs. If you want a new typeface cast in type, it's a whole lot of work, and there are maybe a handful of people in the country that would be capable of doing that. That's a real sort of rarity, sort of commissioning a new typeface for casting in lead. I know there are a couple of people back east who are working on it, but it's not the most common. If you're doing that sort of custom typographic work, you're probably working from photopolymer plates and doing all your design work in the computer.
Any other questions?
Sorry, I guess I was muted. Thanks everybody for coming to this event. And I just want to remind everybody that we have 2 more events in this series that'll be coming up next Wednesday, same time, 4:10, and the following Wednesday at 4:10. Next week, again, we'll have Todd Olson, a professor in the History of Art department who checked out Graphic Arts Loan Collection prints as an undergraduate, and he'll be talking about printmaking, the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, and he'll be in conversation with an undergraduate student about this. And then we have an artist panel in 2 weeks from today, and Randy Hassan will be talking with some artists that we recently acquired prints for the Graphic Arts Loan Collection from. With that, thank you everybody for coming, and we hope to see you in the next events that we have in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you everyone for coming.